Dr. McFarland. When my husband was tested for HD, his CAG was 39. 2 years down the road, when symptoms started to progress, his doctor retested him because the doctor felt like he was showing symptoms too soon for the CAG that he had. For this test, his CAG was 41. Is this studied at all? Is this common?
So it's a good question. Actually, this comes up a lot in our clinic. These questions about the CAG, so the CAG or CAG repeat. So um, I think many people, hopefully in this group, understand sort of the genetics of Huntington. So the cause we know is a expansion of this region of the Huntington gene, the gene that produces the Huntington protein. And that expansion is a DNA expansion of a repeated sequence called CAG that produces a polyglutamine protein. And there's a certain length that's required that's puts you at risk for developing Huntington. So the number you need is 36 or higher. But between 36 and 39, patients have this partial penetrance. So what that really means is it doesn't mean that you're at certain, you may grow up and you may not develop Huntington symptoms. People who have 40 or more of these repeats are 100% risk of developing Huntington's disease later in their life. Now, at low numbers, like 36 to early 40s, the onset of symptoms is highly variable. Okay, the relationship between this size of this CAG expansion is not linear. Okay, and it's a hard concept to explain, but at low numbers, really, the variability is quite high. Onset can be 20s and can be as late as even into the 80s. I have patients over 80 who have their initial onset, can be highly variable. But as the size of this repeat gets larger, there's a better correlation with later or earlier onset and more severe symptoms. But we're really talking about people kind of in the 50s, 60s. I think Dr. Nopoulos can talk to you about what she sees in the JOHD patients. They usually have a much longer repeat. But if we turn back to these these lower numbers, while they're lower, we frequently do see patients who have onset, even in the 36 to 39, it's not uncommon to have patients come in with Huntington's symptoms and manifest symptoms. And it could look just like Huntington's, okay? Just so I know there's this tendency for some folks to think that 39 means you're going to have later onset. Statistically, possibly, but again, I want to emphasize that there's this very wide, broad range of potential onsets, and there are other things that affect the onset of symptoms. We're learning a lot genetically, and Huntington's disease is getting very complicated very quickly in terms of are there modifying. So you have Huntington's is only one of 20,000 plus genes that encode your proteins that make up the things that build the building blocks for your body. So there are many other genes, and you've got over 6 billion pieces of DNA, that encode everything. And there's a lot of other factors that influence the onset of symptoms. So I think of genetic factors and epigenetic factors that weigh into that. So a lot of things that we're learning, and it's just an explosion of knowledge about these other factors that may play a role. But just understand there's a wide degree of sort of when things when symptoms actually start when you have that lower number. The most commons are generally in that low between that 39 to 45 is really the most common CAG repeat number that we see in our clinics, vastly. I want to take just a second to talk about testing, though. I'm not going to say whether it's the right or wrong thing to retest the patient, but I will just talk about genetic testing. Most of the labs that are doing genetic testing do need to follow a protocol, and they are CLIA certified. They should be CLIA certified. And most labs will tell you that their results are guaranteed to be accurate with a plus or minus 1 CAG. So there's a bit of variability there. So I think the fact that this particular patient got retested and it wasn't 39 again, it was 41. Yeah, that's sort of still within, I think, the margin of error is what I would say, or it should be within that margin of error. It's a little bit more than 1, but I think that's basically about the same. I will tell you guys that there each lab has, they're proprietary. They have their method of doing this testing. They generally use what they call primers to focus on that very specific area of the DNA that controls the Huntington's and measure that size of the CAG repeat. So they're not all equal, but they all should be CLIA certified. And I would stick to those types of labs, or a good research lab that knows exactly what they're doing with good experience. But they also can guarantee, but no one can guarantee the results are going to always exactly be the same. So a little bit of variability here. So I hope that
So
helps.
with saying that, are you, so
Yeah.
it's definitely unlikely that a CAG could change, correct? Like,
It's unlikely that the genetic test would change. So there's really, when I tell patients, there's really no reason to repeat a test unless they think it's an error. There are rare cases, and there are many cases that actually are a number of cases that are reported. We have just did one recently where there are mistakes. Mistakes can happen. They do happen. They've been reported many times. So if there's a question about the diagnosis, I don't see there was a question of diagnosis here specifically, but if there's a question of diagnosis, if the disease is not progressing the way you think it should be progressing, or they're developing other kinds of symptoms, then I think, retesting might be medically indicated, but that should be up to your neurologist and specialist. But generally, just retesting to retest doesn't really make sense, because you might get a different answer like this, and then you're stuck with a little quandary, but it really should be the same.
interesting. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think the important point is that it's just not different. This was in, it sounds like, oh, they got a different number. That's within lab error.
Yeah.
That was that. Yeah, that's interesting. I
Thank
didn't
you.
realize.
Yeah.